Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our Build Business 2021 Conference and Conversation series, where we'll be talking all things Build Business with specific speakers conducting sessions this year. I'm Jen Newman, incoming chair of the Build Business 2022 Planning Committee at SMPS and current Build Business 2021 Planning Committee incoming chair. Today, we're focusing on the letter E for equity. When we speak to this year's theme of the word RISE, which stands for Resilience, Impact, Strength, and Equity. I am so thrilled to have the talented speaker, Uniqueka Walcott, here to speak with us about her on-demand transformation session going live on August 2nd. Maybe we'll talk transportation too. Uniqueka.
We could. I do a lot of transportation proposals.
I love it. Going live August 2nd, entitled Cultural Inheritances. You do not want to miss this. She's going to speak to how we can unlock the best versions of ourselves from our own cultural inheritances. This session is roughly based on the Marketer magazine article she wrote for SMPS that came out earlier this year. So I highly encourage you to go find that article and take a peek. Uniqueka is a CPSM and has a strong passion for winning and teaching others to win in life. She's shifted from contract to permanent employee in her first AEC role at a small firm by introducing a process to improve the company and saved a substantial sum for the firm within her first few weeks by taking on her new role. She's been active in the SMPS community since 2015 and serves on the inaugural SMPS National Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. We're so happy to have her here today. Welcome, Uniqueka.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about your session, okay? Without giving too much away.
Yeah, that's the trick here.
A little bit of teaser, but not spoil it. If you had to put it in a few words, what would you say your session is about?
I think that it's really about vulnerability and the ability to unpack your own story and find the power in your story.
Oh, I just love that. Everyone has a unique story, right? And everybody has power in their story. So what do you think attendees are going to walk away with?
I hope that attendees walk away kind of with like a blueprint for what it is to take their story and to find those key elements of power in it. Like for me, it's resilience, reading, and relationships. And I dive into those in a little bit more detail during the session where I talk about, where I inherited these traits from. What were my examples and how do I take those and insert them into my own life? And what things did I have to unlearn? Because not everything you inherit is good for you to use or for you in your current stage or phase in life.
I love it. We all grew up with some bad habits, right?
Yes.
Get rid of the bad and pick out that good stuff. So what does equity mean to you? Since that's the focus of today's theme within our conference theme, the word RISE, what does equity mean to you?
I mean, equity is a really uncomfortable, I guess, or for me, it's a comfortable word, but really to me, equity, the heart of it is about justice. And so when you understand that people start from different points and the goalpost or the dream, the American dream, for example, of owning a house is here, but what are the barriers that you're faced, with to get there? And so you have to understand what tools people need to be equipped to be as effective. And I think the other side of that coin is, certain people are raised, they're told you have to be twice as good and work twice as hard to get half as far. And people have internalized that idea because there is a lack of equity.
Wow, that's deep conversation. I love this. That's the kind of conversation you have around the dinner table with good friends. And I think that's also, the conversation that more and more people in our industry are having. Especially looking at kind of the makeup of our industry. How do we help create more equity? How do we help create more diversity? So I'm really excited for people to be able to have a chance to see this. Well, give us a little background and how you ended up in this crazy industry. I know, so many people I talk to, I'm like, oh, you just picked AEC to go into, right? And they're like, yeah, no.
Yeah,
I wasn't tripped and fell, but what's your story?
Tripped and fell is probably an adequate description for me as well, just to be completely honest. I graduated college in 2011 and spent like 18 months doing contract work in the mortgage industry of all places. This is the industry we're all angry at for, like, the housing crash. But that's where I landed. And I really honestly delved into like my prayer life, and I said, God, this is, what I dreamed or visioned I would become, and this is where I am, and these two things don't match. Yeah. Yeah. And so I started to make some shifts and changes in my life. I like to, call them like faith moves. I said, okay, well, one of my first requests is like, okay, can we get out of contract and into full-time roles? Yeah. So, being a contractor, I was like, okay, well, I get paid weekly, but as a full-time regular employee, I'd get paid bi-weekly. So I started minding my budget as if I got paid bi-weekly. And that was one of the first things I did to kind of shift my mindset. I think that's something people don't talk about a lot when they talk about how to get someplace. And so eventually I fell in love with my high school prom date of all people, when we started dating long distance again after many years. And after about 9 months long distance, we said, okay, someone's got to decide who's moving, because he was in Maryland, I was in Georgia. So I found the 8-week contract opportunity. I said, look, I've been in these shoes before. I know how to take this situation and turn it around for my good. And so I packed my bags and moved to Maryland. Here we are, almost 7 years later.
Wow, that is amazing. And how did you come across this AEC firm that was, the opportunity for you to kind of step into that full-time with a firm?
Well, my husband's a traffic engineer, and so he put in a good word with the firm. Him having known me since high school, he said, look, I know what your work ethic is like. I know you don't play games. I'm willing to be, put my name on the line for you to get this opportunity.
So it is in the family.
Yes.
I love it, Uniqueka. That is amazing. Well, so how fun is that you guys can actually talk at the dinner table and kind of know what each other is talking about, or is that like off limits? Is it like,
no, it's not off limits. In fact, sometimes we have to make it off limits because it becomes too much of a focal point. We're like, hey, we're off work now. But I mean, there are times when, he's looking at plans and he's like, this doesn't make sense. Am I having a moment? And I look at him like, no, that's crazy. Because I've learned so many things, like talking to him about like, level of service analysis, or turns and all this. So he's like, this isn't adding up. What do you think? Or is this a better way? He's like, from a driver perspective, does this make more sense, or is this option better? Like, we have those kind of small talks here and there because I'm aware of what he's actually doing. Vice versa. Like, there have been times, he's like, I'm preparing for a presentation and I'm nervous, and I'm like, let's talk about your part.
Love it.
And how to work through and slow down and get comfortable and confident. But that's because that's what I do. So we complement each other in that way.
I love it. You're not the only one. We have several, I'll call them our little SMPS power couples that are engineers, and then actually they're consultants or people who work in the industry, and they become kind of their spouses' coaches. And so I think that's kind of cool. My oldest is a CAD designer for my former engineering firm, and my youngest is a commissioning engineer. He grew up going to SMPS Build Business conferences, and I made him shake hands with people and say, you will be an engineer that can talk to people, and that's a network. So how fun. What a cool backstory. I love that. We all have our our unique little story, right?
Yes.
So what challenges did you face along the way in your journey that you would say is important to share? And I would say, especially for maybe those young marketers that are like, man, how do I get past this? Or what were some of those kind of lessons you learned from maybe some challenges you faced?
I think one of the first lessons I learned was to listen more than you talk.
Yes.
And ask good questions. So if you don't understand something, be quick to raise your hand and go, look, this doesn't make sense to me. This is what I did get. Can you go over it again? The other thing that was helpful for me was learning how I learned, so that I can explain to people, well, hey, I'm a visual learner or auditory learner. So people could then explain to me in terms that were meaningful for me so that I could grasp the information. I think that was one of the biggest things. I think the other challenge is, especially transitioning from like college life into like the workplace, people have to understand the basics in terms of corporate culture and what is and what isn't acceptable, down to like, attire, ways you speak to people. Or as I tell people, you might want to code switch when you show up to work. There's certain things that are going to make people go, but what does that even mean? Like, you can't go and be like, I got it out the mud. Like, they're going to go, what is this? That's slang, but it's, a term to say, hey, like I started from the bottom and I worked my way up.
Yeah.
So people have to like learn those things as they transition.
Love it. Do you like presenting? Do you enjoy presenting?
I do enjoy it, but it's also terrifying, if I must be honest with you. Like but for me, it's kind of the weird adrenaline rush. Maybe like people get rushes out of skydiving, which I'd never do. Yeah. But I do enjoy presenting. I think that it's kind of one of my strong cards, because I usually present on things that I'm really passionate about. And I feel like you can't lose when you talk about what you know.
Love it. What do you think it means to be a strong leader, especially in the times we're in right now?
I don't even know if strong is like the appropriate emphasis in this space, if I got to be honest with you. I think, but if we wanted to stick with the strong leader, I think in this time, I think strong leaders need to be empathetic. Yeah. I think that's number one. I think number two is to be patient and to communicate, and really almost over communicate, but also understanding that communicating is two ways. I think those are my top three if we're looking for strong leadership in this time. I think most leaders have got a strong grasp on what it is to try and forecast and explain the status quo of like today, this is the status of COVID and we're going back to the office or not. Like I think people have got a grasp on that, but I think it's the less businessy things and more the human connection things that I think are going to differentiate leaders in this time. Can you build connection with people? Can you bring them comfort or at least a sense of awareness that you were aware of the challenges they're facing, and even if you can't fix them, you empathize.
Empathy is everything. Well, so speaking of that, how can leaders build diversity, equity, and inclusion into their culture?
To build it into your culture, I think first off, it has to be intentional. Yeah. I think that's always step one. But I think also that people sometimes underestimate the power they have as individuals. And so I think that when people can think about what they can do as individuals, as allies, even, that makes a big difference, because it's one thing to diversify space and to bring more disabled people or lesbian people and LGBTQ community people or Black women or whatever into your space. But I think that's literally like the baseline in this situation. And it's where you bring people in and then you see this mass exodus because you've not made an inclusive space for them. You've got to make a place where people can feel at home. And I know it's a crazy thing to say. Like, I mean, for example, I spoke with someone at Google recently. She's a Black woman. She said, I feel at home here. And that would shock people to know that she said, I feel at home at Google, when Google was making headlines, for not being a good place for some people. And so when she said to me, I said, well, what makes it feel like home? She said, well, I have people who mentored me who pulled me to the side when I was having a meltdown and realized, like, it's difficult for me to not be the smartest person in the room. And she said, but they pulled me aside and said, look, this is how you navigate this space. Like, she had somebody that was more of a mentor and sponsor to her. And so I think when you're talking about building an inclusive workplace, you've got to be out on a limb with people emotionally, even if they don't remind you of your granddaughter or you when you were in college, and talk to them like on the level, like, here's what I'm seeing. This is how you were showing up in this space. I think a perfect example for me, at Moffitt and Nickel, I had Julie. She came to me and I said, hey, Julie, I said, do you mind giving me feedback? I said, because there's some gaps here I'm experiencing and I'm not understanding what's happening, or I think I'm coming off this way, but the feedback, I'm getting doesn't really align with what I expected. And so I said, you've worked with me on like a lot of proposals. You and I have worked in the same office together. So would you mind spending, 20 minutes with me even, and talk to me from your viewpoint about how I can improve the way I deliver with you all? And one of the things she said to me that really stood out, she said, you show up to these meetings and sometimes you don't take the kind of ownership and confidence that you need to have, which might shock some people to say that. She said, when you come to these meetings, you kind of come and go, can we do this or can we do that? She said, no, tell people what we're going to do and then leave room for them to object. And that's a piece of powerful insight to me, because I think for me, I have a mask on a lot of days. I don't mean like a mask as like a face mask, but like a facade on most days, where I'm so deeply concerned and in my headspace of being perceived as a 4-letter word by people and being mistreated, that I shrink myself when I show up. And so when she said that to me, I said, thank you for letting me know that, because I did not see it that way. And so that's what I mean when we talk about like, allyship and empathy in the workplace and creating a space of inclusion. It's being able to have those conversations with my coworkers, or even something as simple as hair. I was going to out to Long Beach, our headquarters, to wrap up our internship program back in 2019 before COVID. And this was, or actually to start it, I went twice. The first time to kick it off, and I said to my boss, I said, look, I know this is a super awkward conversation. It's probably wildly uncomfortable. Understand that I'm coming to this conversation not to create chaos for you, but I need to understand, what is the culture like out in the Long Beach office versus the Raleigh office where I was located at the time. And so I said to him, I said, I wear my hair a zillion different ways. One minute it's a big, fro, sometimes it's braided. I got different things going on. And so he said, so do you think that it would be a problem if we should have maybe my contract or something of that nature? And so we were able to have that conversation because I laid all my cards out on the table and said, hey, I'm not trying to be funny or awkward, but like, this is something I need to know because, not because just workplace culture, but also understand that I'm going to go teach the next generation of people how to function in an industry that is not known for its culture. What am I demonstrating to them so that they can navigate the space to be here 7 years from now like I was?
And those open conversations are so important. I love the fact that you said it feels like home, because we may not see people that look like us, right? Mm-hmm. But how do those people make us feel?
Yes.
And that home piece, I think, is so smart. And we don't have to understand another person to make them feel at home, right?
Right.
So I love this. I love this conversation. I think it's a conversation we have to have more. And thank you for bringing up that point of, you just went and had the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what so many people are afraid to do. And just kudos to you. And I see Ashia's on here and the whole DE&I.
Hey.
It's the work that you guys are doing is really important. It's important to our industry, and just being able, and I think people have to be open to be able to ask questions, and know that it's okay to ask, and that's where we get that sense of home. So, wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really important for other people to understand who have those questions, say, I don't know how to even go about this.
Yes. Right. And the thing is, I think he handled it so exceptionally well. He said to me, look, he's like, I know you got like 13 different hairstyles. And I was like, true. But he said, for context for you, he said, my wife might get a haircut twice a year. And so, and I don't notice and she's upset with me. I said, so this is, just a simple cultural difference that I wasn't really aware of. So he educated me. And so it was like a mutually beneficial conversation. I was like, okay, this helps. And so I was able to make a decision based on that information.
Wonderful. Well, so one of the other things that I just so admire about you is your vulnerability. And you had a LinkedIn post recently that just really it was so open, so vulnerable, so amazing. I have a similar backstory. So I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't think I've ever shared that in a public forum. And I was so impressed with that. And then during your session, you share a personal story about how it shaped your approach in your own life, including your career. Now, we don't want you to share the exact story because, again, this is teasers. We want people to go and watch the session. They're going to get so much about it. But tell me about how being vulnerable helps you build your story, your narrative in your career, but also relationships.
Being vulnerable is terrifying. Let's just start there. It's not this comfortable thing that I do for fun. In fact, I almost deleted that post like 4 or 5 different times, even at this point. Like today, I was like, should I take this down? I bet you Tarika would see this and text me and be like, girl, you're doing too much. So for me, it's hard, but also I think for me, I'm learning each day. The more that I'm willing to open myself up even just a little bit, the right people will come in, and I will get clarity about the people who don't mean me any good, so I don't have to waste my time with it.
I love it. Well, please do not take it down, Uniqueka. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was brave. I thought it was a way for people that have their own story that maybe they're struggling with or not quite sure how to navigate can see that somebody that is successful like yourself that has navigated that you can do it. So please do not take that down. I thought it was amazing. And I think being vulnerable is so important. And when you're talking about building equity, equity and vulnerability kind of go hand in hand, as terrifying as it can be. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely, they go together, because I think if I wasn't open a little bit with some people about my background in the beginning, that I wouldn't have gotten the support that I received. Like, for example, looking for that next job and getting an interview, and having a friend at SNPS go, look, and telling her, look, this is my current salary, and it's probably subpar, but I don't know because I don't have people. She said, look, never again in your life will you make this little money. Like, we're going to fix this. And I need you to understand, when you walk in the building and you give your number, say it confidently. But having those mentors in my life, and people, because I don't have like family that came from like a corporate background that taught me things like, how to negotiate an offer. Like, I was terrified, but like being able to say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing has really been like the gift, because there are people that want to help you. And you have to just make sure that you seek those people out, and that's the difference in equity, at being successful in that way. It's being vulnerable. I think it's also a two-way street, being vulnerable, because I feel like sometimes people get really, really afraid. And we talked about this on the task force. People get super afraid of getting it wrong, whether it's getting your name wrong when they pick the phone up to call you for an interview, or, getting it wrong from the standpoint of, like, did I say the wrong thing? We have not used this picture in the PowerPoint. Like, you have to be daring enough to have the conversation. Like, just say, hey, look, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm asking for insight. And some people might tell you, look, I'm not the board of Black people or whatever it is to give you advice on this. But most people are willing to give you feedback and share, because they recognize that you're trying, that you care. I think that if you can understand that people care, I think that helps move the conversation so much more. People aren't asking out of willful ignorance or to be hateful. They're asking because they want to do better. And so you got to meet people where they are. As much as you might need help and don't know something, there's something they don't know too. Work together.
Well, vulnerability builds authenticity, right? And so if we're going to have authentic relationships with people, and that helps lead to equity. There's also the real thing out there of imposter syndrome, right? I mean, come on. Have you ever in your career felt like an imposter? I know I have.
Imposter syndrome is like one of those terms I'm grappling with after watching like Jody Ann Burley's like imposter syndrome is fake, like sort of like TED Talk. But I get where you're coming from, that sense of like, what if people find out I don't know what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I felt like that in this year.
Yeah.
Like, you're a CPSM, you're speaking at build business, all of these amazing things, but there were still days I'm like, who is this woman?
Yes. Absolutely. Well, and again, that's having that confidence and that vulnerability. And I think being able to tell somebody, having that person you're close with to say, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And those great people in your life too can kind of talk you out of that, talk you off that ledge, right? Of, you do know what you're doing. You've done this. And especially during, what are we in, month 16 of 2020? Right? Especially over the last year and a half, we're all figuring it out, and that's okay. Well, I have one last question for you, Uniqueka. I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but they put us on a time limit for a reason. Okay. So last question is, do you have any words of inspiration or wisdom that you've recently received, or even received in your career, that you want to share with our audience today? Kind of anything that's helped you along the way that you'd like to pay it forward.
Actually, it's a poster hanging on my wall. I'm going to share it with you guys. It's in my office at home for a reason. And it says, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love. And it's a quote from Buddha. But for me, it is a reminder like that I have to show myself the same love, the same care that I want to receive from other people. And I can't always make that an outward experience. Yes, be kind to people, be generous, but also be generous and kind with yourself. Yeah. Talk nicely to yourself. Like, seriously, think about some of the things you might say to yourself in your head. Would you ever allow someone else to walk up to you and say that? You probably will punch him.
I love that. So I heard about an exercise recently that somebody went through where they had them take their internal talk and they put them in pairs, and they had to tell the other person what they were telling themselves. Right? I mean, how powerful is that? I think it's such an interesting exercise, because when, and it was done with teenage girls, and this teenage girl said that they started crying because she was telling, like, she told herself, you're not good enough. I'm not, I'm not smart enough. And when she looked at her friend and said, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, she started to cry and said, it's so mean. I'm being so mean to my friend. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm being mean to myself.
Exactly.
Uniqueka, what a great way to end this. Be kind to yourself.
Yes.
Right? Uniqueka, any last words before we wrap up?
Thank you all so much for having me as a part of this transformation session coming up on August 4th and 5th at the Build Business Conference. Thank you for letting me be a part of conference and conversations. I hope you all have enjoyed it, and thank you so much. It's a blessing to be able to be here.
Well, again, thank you, Uniqueka. I can't, we're going to have to get on a call and just talk some more, because I could talk for hours just learning. And please keep up that great work on the DE&I committee. And I'm so excited to see this session. I know everybody else is. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for taking your time. Don't forget, folks, mark your calendars. August 2nd. Check out Uniqueka's transformation session that day, as well as the M Live session with CEOs on August 5th at 2 p.m. that Uniqueka is going to be moderating. So you have 2 chances to see Uniqueka in her best. She is phenomenal. You are going to love it. You're going to take so many things away, not just for yourself, but taking these back to your colleagues, your peers, mentors, people that you're mentoring. So we cannot wait to see you at Build Business, where together we will rise.